3 dengan moderator Dr. Tri Satya Masduti Widi, dosen di Fakultas Peternakan, tepatnya di Departemen Produksi Ternak. Baik, langsung saja kita sambut moderator kita pada siang hari ini, Dr. Tri Satya Masduti Widi.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Nadia. Can I share a CV for Simon first? Yeah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This afternoon, a very special moment because Dr. Simon Osting will present about the livestock sustainability, the strategies to livestock sustainability. Because I don't get the CV from you directly, Simon, so let me introduce you just a little bit. Yeah. Dr. Simon Osting is an associate professor at the Animal Production System Group and is specialized in tropical animal livestock system. But besides, of course, for the academic background, everybody know you well, I think, and maybe not everyone known that you also an artist. So you are a Wageningen artist. This is sculptures, paintings. Simon's like to make sculptures, paintings, and poetry. So it's not surprisingly for me, but maybe for anybody else, they don't know yet. Okay, Simon. Now time is yours, so probably 20 minutes is enough, or 30 minutes, so maximum 30 minutes, so we can have more time for discussion. The time is yours.
Okay, Vidi, thanks for the introduction and thanks for inviting me. Let me first check whether you can understand me well. Nobody is complaining? Okay. Thanks for the introduction. I indeed make all kind of artworks, but today I want to talk about livestock and livestock development. And I read that the theme of your symposium was strategies and technologies for sustainable development. And that really made me think about what kind of work are we actually doing for the last years. Is that related to strategies or is that related to technologies? Well, I am Simon Osting. Vidi already introduced me. I work at the Animal Production Systems Group at Wageningen. And what we do there is systems studies. So in systems studies, you already say combine strategies and technologies. Maybe in animal production systems, we of course study technology. We study feeding, we study breeding, but we study it on the level of a farm or of a village or even of a whole country sometimes. So it's maybe a little bit of both. And I want later to make the point that strategies are indeed maybe the thing many people are interested in these days, because we start to believe that that is the way to get more sustainable livestock production. So I'll request to go to the next slide. So the point I would like to make about strategies for sustainable livestock development, that I think technology at this moment follow principles, and principles relate to strategies. And I was involved in two big works going on right now that have to do with sustainability of livestock in the futures. And one is work I did at the World Bank. That was about 2 years ago. Then I was for more than a year at the World Bank, helping them think about how to make the future of livestock production more sustainable. And so that's one project I will briefly want to talk about today. And the other one is about circular food systems. And I will explain what circular food systems are, but also circular food systems, that's a very big word in many countries now. It has principles. And so I want to make the point that technologies will follow these principles. Can I have the next slide, please? Well, one of the reasons why we talk about sustainability of livestock production and about these principles is that there is environmental issues. And just to put it in context, we have the international climate agreements. Many countries have nationally determined contributions. So countries make policy, at least wrote down and expressed their intention to improve and to contribute to climate change mitigation. And actually, so the whole world is committed to do something about it. And big organizations that finance many interventions or many policies in countries like the World Bank, they are requiring and they want to see in projects that environmental issues are addressed. So that's an important thing there. If a country wants a World Bank project, they really should be able to show that their project will contribute to mitigation of climate change. And there is a third reason, that is that many consumers in many places of the world really request that the products they consume should be produced in such a way that the impact on the environment is minimal. May I have the next slide, please? Well, this talking about, say, climate change and the effect of livestock on climate change, because that effect is quite important, is quite an issue, but it's a bit abstract. We don't know exactly what it is. Of course, I think many people experience climate change, but what does it really mean? And I find this graph very helpful in that. On the y-axis, you see the total emissions of greenhouse gases of the world. And on the x-axis, you see time. And if you see these two curves on the top of the figure, those are the curves we should follow as human population in order to stay within the 2-degree climate target. So if we want the climate in the world not to change more than 2 degrees centigrade increase, we have to follow the emission pattern depicted by these two lines. And the one line is where we can say with a 50% probability that we will meet the target, and that's the top line, and the bottom line is the line for 70% probability that we will meet the target. But the message from the lines is, if we follow that pattern, we may be able to succeed in meeting the target of only 2 degrees increase in temperature. Well, the bars on the bottom of the graph indicate the contribution of livestock, or actually the total emissions of all the livestock in the world. And right now it's somewhere in between 7 and 8 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year, which is about 15% of the total emissions. So that's in the year 2000, but it is still about the same. The predictions for 2030 are that it will slightly increase. So then we are at about 10 if we continue in the way we do right now. And then the lower bar indicates if we would introduce all technical improvements we have right now and everybody would use that, we could be about 20% lower in emissions from the livestock sector. And in 2050, it's the same picture. If we produce what we expect that we will produce, well, we have two options. It's either a little bit more than 10, or it is a little bit less than 10 if we apply a lot of technologies. And the same for 2070. So the livestock emission of greenhouse gases in the next 70 or 50 years, it's only, will not change a lot. But then if you look at, so compare the bars with the lines, then you will see that in 2050 or 2070, all the emissions that the world is allowed to emit is covered by livestock. So look at 2070, we are only allowed to have something like 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year. And what is livestock producing? Also 10 gigatons. So the human population cannot have any other activity producing greenhouse gases in 2070, but livestock. And that's not realistic. Of course, human beings will have other activities, say rice production, where we produce carbon dioxide, etc., or methane, of course, of rice production, but that will also contribute. So there is urgency that we really find solutions for greenhouse gas emissions from the livestock sector. We have to reduce it by more than 20%, actually, in order to meet the climate targets. So that's an important, there is an urgency to act in the livestock sector if we talk about climate. May I have the next slide, please? But there's more to livestock and environment. There is nitrogen and phosphate pollution from intensive systems. So, and this pollution can manifestate itself in many forms. Nitrogen may evaporate as ammonia and then cause acid rain. It may end up in water as nitrate and cause drinking water problems and eutrophication, so excessive growth of algae in water, and then the water gets dead, no life in the water anymore. And phosphate can also cause the same problem. Well, I talked about the greenhouse gas emissions already, that is an important environmental issue. And then there is land use. To grow, to produce livestock, we do need a lot of land. And well, if we want more livestock products from more animals, we do need more land. And then all kind of negative things happen. And one important negative thing is deforestation. We need the forests in the world to store carbon, but also to produce oxygen, and we should actually not deforestate more. Other point is that livestock production also requires phosphate, and we only have phosphate stocks for a few hundred years, or some even say only 50 years, in the mines in the world. So phosphate is also a limited resource. So there is a lot of pressure from livestock production on the environment of the world. May I have the next slide? Well, it's not only negative, of course. In the present situation, livestock is important for, well, to maintain soil quality. If you look in Africa, soil mining is an issue now in farms where there is no fertilization and no livestock present. You see that the crop production absorbs a lot of nutrients from the soils every year and again, and never nutrients get back to the soil. So we call that soil mining. And that's really an important thing, and you see that the yields in Africa are decreasing because of the soil mining, and livestock could help to restore it. You can in Africa, livestock can graze, say, on rangelands where no crop production is possible, and the manure can be collected and be applied to the croplands. And that is, of course, what is happening in Africa. Unfortunately, you need a lot of cattle to get sufficient manure on the land to really restore the soil quality. So it's calculated that you may need 15 to 45 hectares of rangeland in Africa to fertilize 1 hectare of cropland. So that is a lot of grazing land and a lot of cattle to really restore with the manure. We also did some studies like this on East Java, and there we find that there are about 2 cows per hectare of cropland, but to really to really fertilize crops like maize and sugarcane from manure, you may need from 5 to 16 cows per hectare of maize or sugarcane. So that's a lot of cattle you require for fertilization. Of course, on East Java, a lot of artificial fertilizer is being used in order to fertilize the land. So there is no fertilizer limitation there. But if you would want to replace fertilizer by manure, you needed a good manure system to provide sufficient manure. May I have the next slide, please? Okay. Well, there is an other urgency, of course, we have with livestock production, and that is to feed the population of the world. So talking about environmental issues, you easily forget the reason why we have livestock. And one reason that we have livestock is, of course, food production. And this graph explains also the pressure on food production and on animal source food production we have in the world. On the x-axis, you see the gross national product, the GNP, of 20 countries in Asia. And they range from poor countries, so those are countries with a low GNP, to rich countries with a high GNP. And on the x-axis, on the y-axis, you see the animal protein consumption in grams per person per day. And you see that if we first look at the right-hand side of this graph, you see that in richer countries, the animal protein consumption plateaus off. So the consumption of meat, milk, and eggs for rich people, rich countries, somewhere stabilizes at the level of 50 to 60 grams of protein per day. And you have to realize that the human being needs about 60 grams of protein, plant protein plus animal protein. So in rich countries, actually the consumption of animal protein covers the whole protein need of human beings. Of course, human beings in these countries also eat plant protein, so they overconsume protein, actually, but that's not part of this, this lecture. What you also see in this graph, but more to the left-hand side, is when countries are poor, that animal protein consumption is low, but when they get a little bit richer, so when they move a little bit to the right-hand side, the protein consumption increases a lot. So it may easily go from 10 grams per person per day to 30 grams per person per day. We did see this, for example, in the last 20 to 30 years in China. In, say, 1990 or so, the animal protein consumption in China was less than 10 grams per person per day. And now it is more than 30 grams per person per day. So that means that the consumption of livestock products tripled in China in about 25 years. And that extra amount of animal source protein had to be produced also. And that's a big pressure on on livestock production. And you see this in all countries in Asia, in Indonesia, in India. Well, mention a country and you will find it there. So many countries are in the middle of this graph, or even on the left-hand side, where the rise in protein consumption is high with increasing income. So that's also an objective for livestock scientists and for livestock project people. We do have to produce more for the future because there is this extra demand. May I have the next slide, please? Take a sip. Well, I now briefly talk about this project I did at the World Bank, and that was for a scientist quite simple, because it was about the dual demand. We want two things with livestock production development. One is more food, and the second is a better environment. And it seems quite simple, but in the reality of the World Bank, it was very difficult. And I read it out what is written here because this is the very polite World Bank language. But they say environmental objectives are progressively embedded in livestock investment. So they want to have it in, but it doesn't always succeed. Because when included, the project teams that work on these double objectives, they lack the specific knowledge to effectively reflect broad environmental objectives in design, implementation, and evaluation. So in simple words, the people of the World Bank and in governments of many countries they work with don't know how to do it, don't know how to combine food objectives and environmental objectives. Because everybody is trained in, okay, if we have a cow, go for food means the cow should produce more milk. And go for environment, what to do then? That is, okay, we know there are some few tricks. If you feed a cow better, per liter of milk, it emits less greenhouse gases, things like that. But real knowledge was not there. May I go to the next? May I have the next slide, please? So, in order to help to guide, say, all these people that work in practice with livestock, with the two objectives of better environment and more milk, or more meat, or more eggs, we made 7 principles at the World Bank. And they are somewhere, there's a whole website, very interesting website, somewhere on in the net, and the link is in this slide. But the 7 principles are actually, advices to project people, principles to follow, you could call them. And if they follow only one or all 7, it will help to meet more food and also a better environment. And the more you do it, the better you do it, the better it works out. But actually, that doesn't matter, because people make their own project and have their own ideas and their own context. A principle will work out differently when you do it in the Netherlands than when you do it in Indonesia. And let's take the first principle, for example, that is contribute to a sustainable food future. It's a bit vague words, but actually the question is there. Do you need livestock in order to meet your future or not? Like, say, the discussion in the Netherlands is very much, we should have healthy food for our population. People should not get diseases because of the food, and they should not eat too much or something like that. Huh? Then the big question is, okay, do we need a lot of livestock for that or not? We can ask ourselves the question, okay, we in the Netherlands, we could consume quite a bit less of livestock products. That is, we don't need livestock products for a good future. We need good livestock products produced in the right way, right? In a very poor country, somewhere in Africa, where people hardly eat any livestock products, it may be very good to produce more livestock products because it is good for children, it's good for pregnant women, it's good for adult people to eat at least a small portion of livestock. So in that country, it's of course not a question that we should not have livestock development. You should have livestock development there. So this first principle is important in the Netherlands, but is less important in this, say, poor African country. So that's the first principle. The second principle that could be followed is to enhance carbon stocks. If we talk about greenhouse gas emission, it's very important that we sequester carbon in soils everywhere in the world. So we should keep forests. We should have grasslands where there is a lot of biomass in the grasslands. They should not be degraded. Well, so better have good grassland than degraded grassland. And this is a chance for livestock production because where there is grassland and if governments invest in making it good grassland, livestock production can benefit from it. And at the same time, climate change can benefit from it. So that's why this is a principle. If you think about, okay, in my project, what I want, can I include their enhancement of carbon stocks? That's profitable. The third principle is improve efficiency at animal and herd level. This is actually a traditional livestock production one. This is just cows with higher production and herds with higher production. So not too much young stock because young stock eat and they produce methane also. If you can have a very efficient herd where you don't need little young stock, it is better. So that's a principle. Source feeds sustainably. Like in Indonesia, for all your dairy production, you cannot produce it from feeds from Indonesia only. So you get feeds from elsewhere. Same what we do in the Netherlands. We get feeds from South America, soybeans. You can source such feeds in a sustainable way. Because if we in the Netherlands feed soybeans to our cattle, and we get it from Brazil, where they burned the forest in order to get land, in order to produce soybeans there, this is not very sustainable. So actually what we then do is we say we are sustainable in the Netherlands, but we do something very unsustainable in Brazil. So that should not be done. So also here you can think about, okay, how sustainable is what we do in another place? The fifth principle is couple livestock to land. Manure is a big issue. And if you get manure like in the farms in the Netherlands, where we have 100 or 200, 300 cows in a farm, there's a lot of manure there. And then you have a problem if you don't have land to apply the manure to. And that land you need the manure also as a fertilizer. If you don't have that, it's a problem. So that's a Dutch problem. We import, as I said, the soybeans from Brazil. So we use the land in Brazil. We have the manure in the Netherlands. And we cannot export the manure back to Brazil, of course. So that doesn't work. So you should actually have systems for livestock where the land, the feed, and the cows or the pigs or the poultry are together. So that the feed can immediately go to the animals and the manure can go back to the land again. Other principle in number 6 is minimize fossil fuel use. That is, fossil fuel gives greenhouse gases, which will never be restored again. So as a world, we want to minimize fossil fuel use, and livestock should contribute to that. Number 7 is an important one. That is, foster an enabling environment. We as livestock scientists may have many nice ideas, but if politicians and institutions are not backing us, are not helping us, or are not helping farmers, it will never happen. We can have the best idea, say, about the nitrogen problem in the Netherlands, but if farmers don't want it, if the government doesn't want it, nobody listens to scientists. So we always have to be aware that this is a point. So this about the principles of the World Bank. Remember of it, the World Bank made some rules to follow, which if you follow such rules, you may make steps, and how to really do it and which technologies to use follow after you make the decisions about these 7 principles. First decide which of the 7 to follow, how to implement them, and then come the technology. Next slide, please. Presently, I do a lot of work on circular food systems. And circular food systems, many people do research on this. We think it's a sustainable way to combine all kinds of objectives. And one of the objectives or one of the problems of food systems is, and food systems is something that goes from the farm up to the consumer, so it's really everything in that system. We do have a lot of waste there. About 40% of what is being produced is somehow waste, ends up as waste in the chain, and is not being consumed. So if in the future we need to feed more people and people eat more, for example, of animal foods, then if we would prevent waste, that would be already an advantage. And this circular food system has some way out to feed the population with less waste. And they also use some principles. So the people working on this have, philosophically come to 4 important principles, and I wrote them down here. The one is use land and water primarily to produce food for direct human consumption. This means crop production is preferred to livestock production. If you have food shortage, you should not grow livestock, because livestock first need to eat food in order to produce food again. So livestock is less efficient. That's meant here. But of course, you can have livestock on lands that are not suited for crop production, or you can have livestock on byproducts. So, but that's principle number 3 here. So the second principle of a circular food system is that you avoid or minimize food losses and waste. So, of course, we should be careful with everything we do and not produce waste. That's this principle. The third principle is if you have wastes, recycle them. Well, and that's what livestock production does a lot. Crop residues, agro-industrial byproducts, manure, other excreta, we all recycle them in livestock production. And the fourth principle is you may use animals in circular food systems, of course, but use them what they are good in. And livestock is good in using waste products. So that's the preferred use of livestock. Give them crop residues, agro-industrial waste, and you can give that to cows, but you can also give that to poultry or to pigs. So you can do things with animals. But also in this thinking about circular food system, it's the principle is very important. People that study this say, okay, this is the core of doing. If you want to improve a system, make it circular, you have to make choices based on these principles. May I have the next slide, please? Well, some examples now from research we are doing in Indonesia to show you, say, how these principles are in the present situation. Here you see 2 tables, and that is about feed use in dairy production in the Lembang district, which is really a dairy district. And the table gives, I got it from a publication about greenhouse gases, but it gives you an overview of products being used as the better feed, no, not as the better feed, just products except grass being used in feeding dairy cattle. And you see it is wheat pollet, often being imported from Europe into Indonesia. So there you have this transportation. Is this a sustainable feed? I don't know. There is rice bran from Indonesia itself. Corn gluten feed, I think that comes from Europe also. Copra meal could be from Indonesia. Palm kernel meal comes from Indonesia. Coffee hulls, tofu byproduct, cassava pommes, well, concentrates can be everything, and rice straw. So you see, many of the products in this list are from Indonesia. And so Indonesia dairy recycles a lot of byproducts. And actually the second table on the right bottom, you see that agro-industrial residues from Indonesia itself is 55% of the diet. Crop residues is 15% of the diet. Forest grass, so that is also grass from land that is not being used for crop production. It's actually there in the forest. If you collect it in a sustainable way, it's sustainable feed. Roadside grasses is the same. The grass is there, it does not compete. There is not much sustainability impacts there. And the only cultivated forage, which is taking land, where you could also grow crops, is this cultivated forage. But if you go to farms, you will see that this forage is often standing on the steep slopes and a bit of remote places or the borders of the farms. So even there, the feed-food competition, so the competition between feed for dairy cattle and crop production is not very high. So in Indonesia farming, I think the circular aspect, the principle of using animals what they're good at, and that is use waste products and also upgrading waste products in this way, is quite well met. May I have the next slide, please? The second issue is the greenhouse gas emissions associated with milk production. Well, also two results here. The first, the graph, where you see on the y-axis the emissions of greenhouse gases per kilo milk, and on the x-axis the milk yield of cows. And in the Lembang area, because these data are from Lembang again, most cows produce somewhere in between 3,000 and 5,000 kilos of milk. And you see that the emissions of greenhouse gas there are intermediate, in the order of 1 to 2 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalents per kilo of milk per year. It could be better. If cows produce more, then you go to the right-hand side of this graph, the emission intensity becomes lower, but not a lot lower. What happens if you go to the left side? So if at farms the milk production is less than 3,000 kilos per cow per lactation, you see that these emission intensities may increase a lot. They may go up to level. If a cow only produces 1,000 kilos in a lactation, the emission intensity may be as high as 4 kilo CO2 equivalents per kilo of milk. So that's 4 times higher or 3 times higher than, say, when the cow is at average production. So there can be gain there in the contribution to emissions. If we go to the table here, there we give this greenhouse gas emission intensity, that is GAGEI, and we estimated that in the rainy season and in the dry season. And funny enough, or weird enough, we didn't expect that, the emissions in the dry season are lower than in the rainy season. And this probably is due to the fact that in the rainy season, the feeding is not really adequate. Actually, people feed too much energy and too little protein. And because of this imbalance, there is a lot of high emission of greenhouse gases. The major source of the emissions, because below in the table are the different processes that contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions. And you see that the enteric fermentation, so the methane produced in the rumen, that is the highest contributor. Manure management, forage cultivation, and the purchased feeds are about similar in their contribution to the emissions. May I have the next slide, please? Well, one other aspect of farming and environmental aspect to work on in Indonesia is manure. Because of the farming systems you are having, and they have very little land, many of the farmers discharge their manure, and the manure just ends up into rivers. And in Lembang, you have the Citarum River, which is heavily polluted, and the livestock sector contributes to that. And here, so 68% of the manure in the district of Lembang ends up in the river because it's discharged. Nobody is using it. And that is equivalent to, 2/3 of the total nitrogen in it, and 2/3, of course, of the phosphate in it. And this nitrogen and this phosphate could have been used. But then you have to find a way to motivate crop farmers or vegetable farmers to use manure. And right now, the subsidies on artificial fertilizer are so high that farmers will never want to use manure because the quality is less than of fertilizer, of course. And the fertilizer, the artificial fertilizer, is very, very cheap. So in the principles of, say, circular food systems, we would say here, okay, you are not recycling, or the waste should be recycled, right? In the principle of the World Bank, it would be couple livestock to land. If you have livestock, you should couple it to land because the manure should be used on the land where actually you get the forage from. May I have the next slide, please? Yeah, and one of the ways to think about this is use local diversity. In every country, you have places where you have more land and land of lower quality. And say, if you have more land and of lower quality, you can have livestock there because then it is less suited for crop production. And this is an example from Kenya, where in the middle of the circles, you find the bigger cities, and there are the markets. And just around the cities, there you don't have a lot of land, but you have intensive production. And the question is, should we have it like that? Because there we miss the coupling of livestock and land, and we do have a lot of accumulation of nutrients. And the question is, shouldn't we have the livestock production more far away from the city, where you do have land, so you can more easily use the manure there, and you can have the animals there. So that's the message of this. In projects, in thinking about, say, the future, use the strategy of placing livestock production there where it where you can meet the principles, and that's often farther away. May I have the next slide, please? Because, and I said this already a little bit, but when you have livestock production close to a city, and you could call the livestock production in our country, in the Netherlands, everywhere you are close to a city, and the same maybe on Java, everywhere you are close to a city. So what you do find is you have industrial systems with a lot of investment, high input, high output. Pig, poultry, dairy, those are the systems. And they have very limited land, so they are land intensive. Everybody in the world thinks that this is the future. because there we produce a lot. But the question is it sustainable? May I have the next slide? Because that is the other system that is in the rural area, so farther away from the cities, where we often have systems with grazing or mixed crop livestock system. They are land-based, relatively extensive, but also relatively low production. So subsistence, extensive dairy, small ruminants you find there. This is a little bit a dilemma because we would like to see the best of both systems combined somewhere. So have the high production of the urban systems, but combined with the land availability of the rural systems, so that it fits better. May I have the next slide, please? And in the present situation, it's for economic reasons not so good, not so easy to combine those situations. Here is a table from research we did in Kenya, where we have this urban location, mid-rural location, and extreme rural location. So that's 3 distances from the city. And if you look at the milk price, for example, that is the first in the table. If you are close to the city, the milk price is higher than when you are far away. That is transaction cost. You don't need first to transport the milk to the city. The milk is already there. So you're closer to the milk plant, for example. What you see in Kenya, for example, in concentrate, that because you would expect that the concentrate price is cheaper in the city than in the rural areas. But where you have good organization already, and you find that in many places of, say, the trade in concentrates and other inputs, you see that the prices do not differ so much between the rural and the urban. So milk price is important, but the other prices are not so much different. Farms in the city, close to city, so in areas where there is no land, have one big problem, and that is forage. They don't have the forage, the cheap feed available. And that's why if you look at milk production and then the yield in kilo per cow, you see there is hardly any difference between the yield in kilo per cow. Despite the high milk price, you would expect much more intensified systems close to the city, but in Kenya, this is really hampered by the fact that there is no forage there. So, may I have the next slide? These constraints for intensification actually, make the plea again for coupling livestock to land. There where you have good milk prices, you see lack of forage. And there could also be a lack of market, but that's not so important now. And in the rural, where you actually have the good forage, because you have land, and you have land for manure, then the milk prices are low. So the solution is somewhere there, to get better milk price in the rural and benefit from the fact that there is forage available and other things. So again, this coupling of livestock and land could be a way out, to get more and sustainable intensive systems. Last slide, I think, or this was the last already. No. This is the last slide, so my concluding words. Land to grow forage and for manure application may be one of the principles from say, the World Bank principles and from the circular food system principles that are most, urgent for as a strategy for sustainable livestock development. But all the other principles are also, or can be important also. This implies, because now I come to technology, for example, technology for manure is essential because we need to use manure in the best way in order to be circular or to meet or to reduce pollution caused by manure. So we need technologies for manure. We also need forages that do well, high yielding, growing on places where the soil is maybe not super good, etc. So technology surrounded or associated with forages also important. But again, and I want to finish there, strategies at this stage are the most essential. Thanks for your attention. Give the word to you, Vidi.
Yes, thank you, Simon. I think we don't have much time, but I think many questions already waiting now. First, before I give to the audience directly, I will read one message from Professor Zainal Bahrudin. Sustainable animal production has some dimension. It is one of important dimension related to economical dimension, especially for developing country like Indonesia. One of Indonesia development on animal production problem is that we have many smallholder farmers and they have many obstacles such as capital and marketing. So do you have a suggestion to convert their problems to challenge one? So if we understand in developing country, maybe we give a little attention to the environmental dimension. So how to convert this their problem to challenge one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, also the fact that you have this symposium, it's on sustainability of livestock production. It is clear that environmental issues, sustainability is environmental, economic, and societal elements that are important. So it's not true that in Indonesia or in developing countries, people don't look at it. They look at it. And I mentioned the Citarum River. There is a whole project around it to make it cleaner, and livestock has to contribute to that. So that objective is there. Well, there's also a social objective in it. You do have many smallholders producing, and that's also a social element, isn't it? I mean, you may have the choice that we have very few large farms, but then you don't give the employment and the land use to smallholders. And so this is a social thing, which is an objective you are meeting at this moment by livestock production in Indonesia. Also, livestock contributes to the livelihood of many households. And of course, environmental issues are, I mentioned those already. Economics is another point, but it's also part of the social element that small households. I hear myself right now. That's okay.
Okay. Prof. Zainal?
Is okay, it's enough. It's enough, I think.
Yes, thank you.
But especially for the marketing problem, we have to have collaboration between the big animal production with the smallholder. You have experience in related with what kind of collaboration in order to sustain by especially for the smallholder farmer in terms of economical problem. You have such experience in collaboration, the type of collaboration.
Yeah, to some extent. Of course, in the Netherlands, we do have, or say where dairy development happened about 100 years ago. Because of cooperations, cooperatives between then small farmers. And these small farmers, they established a dairy farm for a dairy plant. And I see the same happening on Java, of course. You do have these cooperatives and farmers groups. And in that way, the cooperative can communicate with the farmer group and the farmer group leader and the farmer group with the farmers again. I think that's a way that you can organize farmers in producer groups, and then you can communicate with them, you can train them, and the farmers can also approach you with their wishes. So I think that's a way out, and it's also a way to bring all these environmental objectives to farmers, and also social objectives. And farmers may probably fight for their own economic objectives.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah, I have another question in the chat room. Two questions, but I think it's similar. From Pak Gede and Burani, yeah. Do you think that in the future the role of livestock as a source of meat, milk, and egg will be replaced by, let's say, a synthetic product? As we know that livestock, especially in Indonesia, plays as a socio-religious role. Well, how about this issue, Simon?
Yeah, I cannot look into the future, but I think to some extent it will. And I talked about that also slightly. Like, say, in the West, in the Netherlands, people on average eat 60 grams of animal source protein per day or so, and that is too much. And you see that many people are replacing animal protein by plant protein. We have a lot of fake chicken and fake cattle meat and soy products, which are very tasty, and you see many people purchase that instead of meat, for example. And I think that's a development. But then you are at the level, say, of high and overconsumption. And there are other places of the world where the consumption of animal products is quite low, and animal products have health benefits also. So I see there that the production, or sorry, the consumption will increase. But we did a study also that in many developing countries, you have a big group in the societies that are over-consuming also a lot of animal products, and that's also not healthy for people in developing countries. So I think everywhere in the world, people could look at the consumption of animal source products and see whether it's still sustainable for what they are doing for their own health, but also for the environmental health. And you can make choices there.
Yeah. Okay. Simon, I noticed that you mentioned that better if we keep one productive cow, for instance, instead of several less productive animals, something like that, isn't it? It means that it's better to keep efficient animals, or the most productive animals. I think it's related with the improved breed. If we talk about the more productive animals, and the impact of livestock production to the environment, I think we is already well sounded. But how about the vice versa? The impact of environment or global warming in this context to animal production. And if we have productive animals or efficient animals in the production, so it's already happened actually. We have been it has been shifted the local breed into the improved breed. So how the robustness of the cattle of the animals, I mean, to cope the environmental challenge or global warming.
Yeah. That's a good question and a good point, because I addressed actually only two elements, and that is environment and economics, and food output. And there, efficient animals are better. But of course, and I didn't address it, people have animals for many reasons, and that is to say, as a banking function, and for plowing, and for cultural reasons. The Madura cow, Vidi knows a lot about, etc. I mean, they have cultural values, and that's one thing that should be taken into account, and that makes the matter only more complicated, because you have an extra objective in there. And then there is this also this thing of climate change resilience. So if it gets more dry or more wet, or you get floods, or there is for a long period no feed or something like that, then you better have robust cows of the local breed that may, in the good times, produce a little bit less, but still produce or survive or have all the other functions during bad times. So then there is a kind of optimum. So I'm not advocating that everybody everywhere should go for the very best breed and forget about the robustness. I don't think so. That people should do that, but you have to find an optimum. So maybe take the local breed and breed that up. So, to keep the robustness, but get the best production possible under that conditions. And one of the things out is that if we start projects, always realize, will the project be achieved by doubling the number of cattle, or are there other ways? Because the biggest problem is that we get too many animals. So if we could stick the amount of animals that we have to the amount we have right now, and not double the livestock population, that would already help. So you can maintain all the local breeds, etc., but not more animals in the world. That would be my major message.
Yeah, that's I think it's need good calculation for the optimum production. Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, because we have we just have time until 2 o'clock. But one question more, Simon, in the chat room from Pak Dahlan, Ahmad Dahlan from Lampung. That in Indonesia we know that the use of land for palm oil plantation is big. It's widely used now, and by the deforestation of an area. This issue may be increased gas emission, as we know, and on the other hand, we plant palm oil and utilize byproduct of the palm oil for livestock feed, and of course, livestock will produce manure that can be used for fertilization. Do you think this situation is sustainable or not?
Well, that's a difficult question for me, because I have never studied, say, the sustainability of palm oil production as such. But I can say, if you have a palm oil plantation, you could combine it with livestock. And if the sustainability is low, and I think many people say that palm oil production does not have a good sustainability, but you can increase it slightly, or you can increase it by combining it with livestock, for example, because you have an exchange of manure and you utilize land underneath the palm oil trees for livestock production. So it fits a bit in the circular thinking. But that's all I can say, because I know too little about the sustainability of palm oil production per se.
Yeah, maybe I think it's negative, or I don't know, campaigns because of the palm oil plantation in the Western. So how, in my opinion, how to advocate, how to
also have a good contribution to the issue. I think not only livestock can cause the global warming, but also in the other hand, the livestock can improve the palm oil plantation, I think. Yeah, but yeah, I'm not expert also in the oil palm plantation integrated with the livestock. Yeah, Simon, thank you very much for your nice presentation. It's very interesting. And yeah, I have to close this session because we only have until 2 o'clock. Thank you, Simon.
Yes, thanks you all for your attention, and it was nice presenting to you.
Yeah. Thank you, the audience. So I will give to the MC.
Ya, baik. Terima kasih Dr. Tri Satya Masdutiwidi yang sudah menjadi moderator dalam sesi plenary yang ketiga. Dan untuk selanjutnya, ya, kita akan menyerahkan sertifikat untuk pembicara.
Pak siapa? Ya, Simon.
Bentar Bu, kami cek.
Kayaknya
Dr. Simon sudah live.
Masih ada. Simon masih ada.
Oh, masih ada. Baik.
Simon. I thought that you were live.
Now we would like to give certificate for Dr. Simon Osting as the speaker for the third plenary session.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And sertifikat untuk Dr. Tri Satya Masdutiwidi selaku moderator.
Thank you.
Ya. Baik Bapak dan Ibu, setelah ini Bapak dan Ibu akan dibagi ke dalam beberapa ruang yang sudah kami settingkan. Kami ingatkan bahwa di ruang 1 nanti adalah untuk bidang nutrisi, kemudian di ruang 2 sosial ekonomi, di ruang ketiga produksi, reproduksi dan pemeliharaan ternak, kemudian ruang 4 teknologi hasil ternak dan pengabdian. Bapak Ibu silahkan bergabung sesuai dengan jadwal yang telah ada, atau bagi listener silahkan bergabung sesuai dengan minatnya. Dan kita untuk sesi ini akan sampai pukul 15.45 dan kemudian nanti akan ditutup. Baik, terima kasih Bapak dan Ibu. Selamat mengikuti sesi selanjutnya.